Hello and welcome to a special episode of FI Studios. Today we're talking to 𝗟𝗏𝘁, columnist for the New York Times. His writing on recipes and food have made a great impact on home cooks and chefs alike, and he has recently come out with a new cookbook, Korean American. It celebrates and explores the realms of possibilities within the cuisines of Korea and the American South. We're lucky to have him with us now to talk all things food and cooking. Eric, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
It's a great pleasure. It's an honor. I'm a big fan. So Eric, please share with us, first of all, who you are, what you do, and tell us about your new book.
I am a cooking columnist for the New York Times. This book, Korean American, I wrote over the course of a year during the pandemic, and it came out 2 years ago and kind of changed my life, changed my career. I got the New York Times job around the same time. And now I write about food and recipes for the New York Times, and I'm constantly thinking about how people cook and eat out in the world, especially in the United States. I would call myself an Americanist. And yeah, I'm actually working on a recipe right now as we speak. Trying to figure out how to make zucchini exciting this summer.
I like that. I do like zucchini, so I'm happy to hear. I can't wait to see what you've come up with. Eric, tell me more. You just said you're an Americanist. What do you mean by that? Define that.
Ooh, I feel like one thing people don't know about me is that I'm a former academic. I call myself a recovering academic. I was working on a PhD at Columbia for 3 years before I ever started writing about food. And, as an academic, I studied 20th century American literature, and in the industry, you would call yourself an Americanist if you studied American literature. So I just kind of realized the last few years of my career at the New York Times, I've been writing a lot about specifically mid-century, 20th century American cooking. And I found myself really attracted to that because I think I've always been attracted to that century and that era of American culture. And it makes sense that now that's what I cover in my work, in my day-to-day work. For instance, I'm drinking some pink lemonade right now because I'm writing about pink lemonade. This is a very American drink that has an interesting circus history, which is very, very specific. And I think I love knowing that the things that happened historically in this country, they're not that far away. That's the really fascinating thing about American history and culture to me. It's so recent. It's recent history. So you can really find the person who invented something. You can even interview them, or you can interview their kids. Just because it's recent history doesn't mean it's not interesting. I think it gets overlooked a little, and so I like to bring out facts and reverberations and revelations from recent American history, so that we can kind of really appreciate what we're eating in 2024 in modern times.
And I love the intentionality that you have, as you're expressing yourself. It comes out in your writing. I've really been enjoying reading your book. Can't wait to start cooking the recipes. Eric, what has the reaction been to your cookbook so far, especially from the context of, this intentionality of fusion, drawing upon, your roots living in the South, in America, drawing upon your Korean heritage? What has the reaction been like?
Mostly positive. It happens to be that this cookbook is my debut, so it's sort of the reaction to it coincided with the beginning of my food writing career, I would say, or at least the beginning of my public food writing career. And I feel that it was a big learning curve because there are some naysayers. That's kind of the fire behind this particular book. Every time I wrote about Korean food, I found a lot of authenticity gatekeepers, and it's not something that I like to dwell on anymore because it's something that I've moved on from, but also I think culture in general has moved on from. And what I mean by that is this notion that a Korean cuisine or something that you personally grew up with needs to necessarily fit some image or platonic ideal or arbitrary distinction in order to be considered that part of that culture. And so when I started writing Korean American, I was just beginning to write about Korean food, and I thought that I would be defining things like this is banchan, this is kimchi, this is not banchan, this is not kimchi. And then I just kind of realized that when you actually do the reporting, luckily I did a lot of this work as a columnist at the New York Times on a very public stage, but also with incredible editors and wordsmiths and people who care about language and intentional vocabulary. And because of that training and the feedback I got from so many people when I was writing about Korean food, I just kind of realized that it's the real world it doesn't necessarily match up with what I was feeling from commenters. I feel like I'm speaking very vaguely right now, but and the anecdotes are really what help tell this story. But I like to use the example of the lemon pepper bulgogi in Korean American. When I first started developing a bulgogi recipe, because I was like, bulgogi is so famous that I need to have a bulgogi recipe in the book. I was making these pretty delicious, pretty okay soy sauce-based marinated bulgogi recipes, and it was summertime. I was grilling a lot at home, and my family was delighted to have bulgogi from me. But the more I did it, the more I just kept trying to chase this thing that I wasn't hitting, because they all tasted so boring to me. I was like, why am I providing a classic bulgogi recipe? So I was on the side, sort of for fun, developing this lemon pepper bulgogi. I was making my own lemon pepper rub. I was in Atlanta, back home for the first time since I was a kid. As like a 28-year-old, I was back in my mom's house as an adult, and kind of not just readdressing my childhood as a child of Korean immigrants, but also as a Southern boy. And lemon pepper was just such a big part of my growing up. And my mom is the one who was like, that lemon pepper bulgogi is more delicious. Or she was like, that's the one that you should put in the book. And I love that because it was permission from my mother, with whom I was writing this book, but also I like that I was subverting it. And it was kind of I don't want to say middle finger, but it was kind of a middle finger to my haters. And there were a lot of people who, both Koreans and non-Koreans alike, there's a lot of people who have this personal relationship to Korea. And so if the recipes didn't match their expectation, they kind of like poo-pooed on the book. But with that said, a majority of the people, the hundreds of people who like came out to book talks, I was amazed. These are the people who are like holding your hand and crying and telling you like, thank you so much for writing a book like this. I felt so seen. And those are the moments that I started to realize I needed to pay attention to, and not the authenticity gatekeepers. It's been a long journey, to say the least.
That was great. Thank you for sharing that. Just such a wonderful journey you've been through, getting in touch with readers, seeing their reactions. One thing that I noticed from, reading your book and also seeing, online commentary is that the one trend, even amongst the quote unquote haters and the fans of the book, is everyone, and I think this speaks to us in society in general at this moment, we're all trying to look for something to relate to in our experience. And especially since, in an exciting way, the community in America, like the Asian American community, we're getting a platform. And so everyone is kind of looking for an experience to relate to. And so I think, from my view, it seems like, and especially speaking as an Asian American, as a Korean American, the first instinct I think tends to be, oh, is it like what I know? Is this bulgogi recipe like, the one that I know? Because that's authentic, when it's actually really subjective. And that's what I loved about your book, is that you're providing your experience, which is totally different from my experience and someone else's experience. But we're all tied together in the fact that, we're Asian Americans, and that, our parents raised us in this country. But that's where the similarity stops. And I feel like, people are slowly awakening to that too. Like, oh, my immigrant experience is going to be different than that person's or that person's. And that's what I really enjoyed about, reading in your book, like how living, the way that you did in your environment impacted you, and really enjoying being enlightened in that way.
Wow.
So thank you for that.
I love talking about stuff like this because it's not even just, to be clear, I think finding connections across different Korean American experiences is such a joy, and why I love all the Korean food that's coming out right now, and the Korean food writers, the Korean cookbooks. But I also think the people who did have trouble with certain ways that I wrote about Korean food and Korean American or presented certain dishes that didn't match their own childhoods, I think I started to really understand the psychology of it, and it's very political and it's a little dark, but it has to do with scarcity. And I think it's this idea that you get a kimchi story in the New York Times as a Korean person, or even like a Korean journalist who's been trying to do that for a while, and you finally see it on the front page, and it's not what you wanted that one moment of representation to look like. And also the fact that it wasn't you who wrote it, like that's what I'm getting really deep here, but it's because I think that was the dark ages in like starting 2020 when, people were writing more about Korean food. And then, and I think what really happened was now there are so many projects being greenlit, not even just in food, but when I think about the cookbooks that are coming out, there's a soju cookbook by Irene Yu coming out. There's a banchan book by Caroline Cho coming out. It's really good. Korea World just came out, which is a really smart take on things. I think because more people started writing about Korean food, just the market got bigger, and it just felt good for people to realize that it's a win for one person or like two people, three people. It like multiplies after that, and that's kind of what I watched happen. And anyway, I just wanted to bring that up because I think what this cookbook taught me is that Asian people and Korean people can really drive markets, and gochujang sales have never been higher. It's one of those like fascinating moments in history, and I love seeing it on the grocery store shelves. Gochujang, you can find it anywhere now, which is really exciting. But when I was developing this book, that wasn't the case. Yeah, a lot has changed.
I'm sure a lot of evolution. I mean, I feel like you feel a sense of pride when you see, whether it's on TV or even, like in the store when you see people, talking about maybe a Korean ingredient, or, even I know even when I see non-Korean people, in the H Mart, and they're really excited to be there, and they're in the sesame oil section, or,
Yeah.
I find that really, I find that really gratifying. It feels good, right, to be noticed, to be seen, as you said, and yeah, it's a really exciting time to see where Korean cuisine is going in the United States, for sure.
Yeah. Recently in H Mart, this older gentleman who looked like he had never walked into the H Mart before, but welcome. It was great to see him. He was checking out with this tub of gochujang because I think he wanted to. I was hearing him talk to the cashier, and who's not even Korean, and he was like, "What do I do with this? Like, my boss wants gochujang chicken wings, like grilled, tonight or something. And is this enough?" And I was like next to him, and I had just developed a gochujang sauce recipe for my job, and it was on my phone. It was like the first note so I just kind of like looked over, and I was like, "Hey, so take out your phone, take a picture of this recipe." So it's not, you can't just like use the gochujang. You have to stir in some sugar and vinegar, and you have to like cut it because it's a cooking base. And then you apply it after you grill the chicken. And he was like, "Thank you, stranger." And it was one of those, I think that's the spirit in which the people who are excited to share Korean food are doing it now. And it's no longer this like, this is my culture, you don't get to have it, don't touch it. Like, it feels good that people are sharing, and because ultimately the money is going to the pockets of Koreans. And I think that's the whole economy, and that's what really matters.
Absolutely. I also love that the guy didn't recognize you. He was just like,
"Oh yeah,
hey.
yeah."
No, that's
Usually
great.
people
That's
who
great.
recognize me have touched gochujang before, I think.
I do wanted to kind of dovetail off on that. I mean, you do definitely have an audience. You have a large audience, Eric. You have a sphere of influence. I would love to hear from your point of view, your take, your insights on, what the drivers are for this growing desire for global flavors. We at the Food Institute, we've been doing, our reporting, and that is just the #1 trend across the board, whether in CPG or in food service. People want, different food experiences now. They want to taste, they claim they want authentic, ethnic, experiences, new types of flavors. What do you think are the drivers for that?
Ooh, this is a great question. It's evolved so much for me over time, but I would say that my book, when I was developing the recipes in the book, which has things like creamy bucatini with kim, roasted seaweed, roasted shrimp and grit. It has like a shrimp and grits, but the shrimp is seasoned with 𝗟𝗏𝘁 and butter and fish sauce. I kind of like, I was just trying to create fun dishes out of my mother's pantry because that's what I had available to me. And I think one really important aspect that I realized later as I develop recipes, maybe a little more intentionally for my job, my daily job, is that, people are ready. They're ready to add a new ingredient to their pantry if you can convince them it's delicious and worthy enough. But also it's really easy to do so because most ingredients in the world are beloved by a certain group of people, a certain culture. It might not be an American culture, but it's the example that really comes to mind for me is 𝗓𝗃𝗓 𝗂𝗏𝗁. This is like this 7-spice blend, Japanese. It's so good because it's not just the spiciness of the chilies, the 𝗂𝗏𝗁. It's also the sashimi part is the 7 is the exciting part because there's citrus peel, there is umami from seaweed, there is savoriness and nuttiness from sesame seeds. It's a mix that's so pristine that I took for granted growing up because we went to sushi a lot, my mom and I, and those meals were formative for me because those flavors you could only get at a restaurant. But as an adult, I was like, I love that sprinkle of 𝗂𝗏𝗁 on our udon that we finish our sushi nights with. Why don't I try glazing some pork chops with some of that? And I realized all it takes is education. If you educate people, and especially if you tell people who are open and excited to learn, it's amazing what they'll go out and buy, even if they have to go to the separate Japanese grocery store, Korean grocery store. But of course, there's like online shopping now, and I just realized that food media for so long has been led by mostly white people and gatekept by white people. And because of that, the food that's on magazines, that's in every Whole Foods, that's in every market, has for a long time looked the way it has, because those people in those rooms are saying things like, oh, that's a specialty ingredient. You can't get it at Kroger or Whole Foods or whatever. But I realized that in media, if you put it on the magazine, if you put it on the front page of a newspaper, a national newspaper, those grocery stores will start carrying those ingredients because people are going to the grocery stores and be like, do you have this? And I know some grocery stores actually keep up with my columns because they are trying to make sure that their store is stocked that week with that ingredient. I'm sure Alison Roman drives, that kind of thing a lot. Samin Nosrat sold out buttermilk. The grocery stores are how people buy their food. But the thing that influences it is media.
So Eric, related to that point, I mean, how would you say the profile of the at-home cook in America has evolved in the past 10, 20 years?
Ooh, man. I think from my perspective, I've kind of been a home cook customer of food media since I was a kid. I started baking and cooking since I was 13 years old, and very much influenced by the Food Network, which did a lot to change food culture and get people to really cook at home. I think what's really changed is people are just way more educated now, and they have access to more ingredients. Immigrant communities have flourished. The children of those immigrants are now grown-ups and they're all chefs. And so I like this idea that all we were waiting for was the children of those immigrants to grow up and do their thing. And that's why it's so exciting now to go out to eat food, because there's so many different types of people cooking, and it's not just one voice, one French trained whatever anymore, because that food can be really boring sometimes. Sometimes it can be really well done, though. I love Her Place in Philadelphia. They also have a restaurant called My Loop, Amanda Schulman. And then there's Dame, it's a fish and chips place, but so much more than that. I feel like those two restaurants, those two chefs use French technique, but in an innovative way, in a way that is really honest to their origin stories. And I think, so it's exciting to see even French cooking and French influences get updated, a little bit.
Yeah, thanks for the rec. Sounds like places that I definitely need to try. Eric, going off of that question, off of the previous question, given what you know about, what's being sold out there today, from products, ingredients, what do you think is the most important thing that businesses should try to keep in mind when launching new products, developing, new products, trying to think of new concepts, new ideas? What do you think it is that, today's at-home cook or, even just food enthusiast needs or wants right now?
I can speak from the recipe perspective. I'm definitely not a product producer, but as a consumer and also as a recipe developer who sees what people click, I think, man, what really resonates with people is simplicity. But I've always described it as simplicity with either with a twist or simplicity with one aha moment, a learning opportunity. When people stop me on the street, they're not saying, "Oh, I love that 7-hour kimchi 𝗟𝗲𝘁 that you developed for the New York Times." That one New Year's. It's one of my favorite recipes I've ever done, but it's also one of the most difficult. And the few people who made it loved it, to be clear. But I would say that people stop me on the street because they're like, "Thank you for the tuna mayo rice. That feeds my family." It's a lot of like rice bowls because that's how I eat. And I think that's what I learned is that I've been actually trying to go back to that state where, I think as a developer, I need to always write recipes that come from my real life. And so I try to live a life. I try to, it sounds cheesy, but I try to stop work. I try to cook dinner for my partner and me. Sometimes he cooks and inspires a recipe. I try to give him credit when I can. But it's the only way to create something that actually hits, something that actually goes viral is for it to truly be useful. Not that you can manufacture virality, but I think it's nice to know that what people really want help with is feeding themselves. And it's but they also want to be delighted. So I try my best to do stuff like that and in the kitchen, and because that's how I eat. For instance, one recipe that I'm writing, and I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of flack for it, but it's a very simple thing that I do when I truly don't have time. I make a perfect pot of rice. Like I prioritize that. It takes about 20 minutes. You have to rinse the rice, you strain it, you soak it, and then you boil it for exactly 17 minutes. You let it sit covered, but then I put a towel over it, and then you cover the lid, and you let it's the sitting off the heat for 10 minutes in the steam that finishes cooking the rice. And I don't know, it's kind of like resting your steak. You should rest your rice too, and you get perfect rice. And I like stirring some vinegar and sugar into that, or mirin, and then it becomes instant sushi rice. Sushi rice is instant, except for the rice part. And then what you do is you just eat that. I just literally put the pot on the table. I take out a few packets of kiem, roasted seaweed, sometimes marketed as roasted seaweed snack, and slice an avocado. And you kind of just make hand rolls at the table, and that's how you feed yourself these like infinite avocado rolls. And you can eat as many as you want. And maybe there's kimchi on the side, but more often than not, it's just that's what I eat. And we're just calling them like avocado hand rolls. And there are people out there who don't understand that there are home cooks who just need to eat, and that there are people who have real lives and are busy. And that's something that might really help someone who didn't necessarily grow up with that. And but the criticism that I anticipate is, wow, we're writing recipes for my after school snack now, or like the people who, it's a lot of Asians, but not just Asians. It's like, you don't have to be from the culture of that recipe to criticize it, but a lot of people think a recipe is supposed to be a new invention, but recipes have so many definitions. And I think, sorry, I'm on my spiel now about recipes, but I just really think people want simplicity, and they just want cool ideas to be fed. And I wish more people understood that relationship between recipes and what they're meant to provide, which I think is service and ideas and inspiration. And I have one last example, actually. There's this peanut butter toast that I make. It's toast with peanut butter, a sprinkle of salt, and then a drizzle of honey, and then a huge shower of nutritional yeast. It's something that I was eating a lot when I was really stressed and didn't have much time, and it was a good hit of protein, but really satisfying and so strange and delicious, and tastes like those cheese peanut butter crackers. And I posted that, and I don't know, that's to me is a recipe. It doesn't need an official 𝗏𝗏𝘁 cooking, page or anything, but I know that if it did have one, a lot of people would love it. The majority would love it, and the majority would eat it. And many people actually have on my Instagram. A lot of people made it, but there's still that contention. People think that a recipe is supposed to be something ridiculous, but that's a recipe, and that can, if that did well, it would drive peanut butter sales. It's like that. There's a direct correlation. So I don't know. I think I'm fascinated by all of this, and more just an observer.
This is really interesting stuff. For me, I'm getting, it's about celebrating the ingredients, having a good time in the kitchen, not making it so complicated. Just, you want to get yourself fed, but you want to have fun doing it. You want to enjoy the experience, and it doesn't have to be so fancy or complicated. It's, home cooking. It's, it's important. It's an important thing to, take time to enjoy. And that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. I wanted to add something that I think I got to this state of cooking, not just from the feedback of which recipes do well, but also all the research I do, especially around Thanksgiving. I'm studying these very iconic American recipes that were prior to recipe developers at magazines. There were recipe developers for companies like Campbell's. They were called home economists, and their jobs were to figure out how to make an amazing dish like a casserole, or maybe stuffing, or a macaroni and cheese. How to create that with just 3 or 4 ingredients that you buy at the store, and then it becomes this, I call it closed loop economy. I haven't studied economics much, but it means that company that sells those onions, and then that company that sells those green beans, and that company that sells that soup, they have this nice kind of like exchange of profit from this recipe. And the recipe developer maybe wasn't necessarily compensated for each one in the way that a pop star might be paid for the songs that they license. But it's I think it's the economy of recipes has always fascinated me, because historically it was always based on magic that happens with 3 or 4 ingredients.
Very well said. I like it. All right, Eric Kim, columnist for the New York Times. Eric, thanks again for joining me. This was great.
Thanks for having me.
And for more great content, you can always check out our playlist by clicking here. Till next time, I'm Susan Choi. Take care.